Welcome to part 2 of the Vince McMahon complaint, read aloud to you. This is page 30, section H. McMahon recruits Laurinaitis into his exploitation of Miss Grant and transfers her into Laurinaitis' department at WWE, trafficking in sex acts at WWE headquarters. During this time, Miss Grant became so sick from the stress of situations that McMahon had subjected her to that her weight plummeted to just over 100 pounds, which McMahon ignored. One distressing event occurred on November 21st, 2020, when McMahon drove Miss Grant to WWE headquarters to fulfill his fantasy of having a sexual encounter with her in his office, causing Miss Grant to suffer a panic attack in the passenger seat while pleading with McMahon to change his mind and drive her back home. McMahon scoffed and gave her an ultimatum: either have a sexual encounter in his office or inside a parked car. Terrified, Miss Grant obeyed McMahon's decision, and they entered the WWE headquarters for the encounter. Further, despite Miss Grant's repeated statements that she did not consent to threesomes with McMahon and physical therapist, McMahon advised her to others and told her that he had found another person to join them, defendant John Laurinaitis. In November 2020, McMahon pressed Miss Grant to make explicit photos and videos to send to Laurinaitis. McMahon orchestrated exchanges by instructing Miss Grant when to create explicit content for Laurinaitis, including what to say, and provided her with notes to adjust her performance. McMahon then facilitated the exchange of explicit content back and forth between Miss Grant and Laurinaitis. Notably, even once phone numbers were exchanged between Miss Grant and Laurinaitis, McMahon insisted that he be privy to any messages that Miss Grant sent to Laurinaitis and demanded that she report back about all interactions, further illustrating the level of control he had for Miss Grant. On or about December 29th, 2020, a threesome was arranged between McMahon, Laurinaitis, and Miss Grant at McMahon's condo. McMahon instructed her to tell Laurinaitis that she was a neighbor and girlfriend working in the legal field, but not at WWE. Shortly after meeting Laurinaitis, Miss Grant asked him if she was the first woman whom McMahon had introduced him to in such a setting. Laurinaitis failed to respond and shot a look directly at McMahon, who quickly intervened by kissing Miss Grant and initiating the sexual encounter amongst the three of them. Once again, Miss Grant asked for protection. Once again, her request was denied after an assurance that Laurinaitis was, quote, clean, unquote. In the days that followed, McMahon texted her that Laurinaitis hugged me like a bear and said thank you to me about 12 times already. In contrast, Laurinaitis messaged Miss Grant, quote, thanks for the fun afternoon, end quote. On or around January 25th, 2021, Miss Grant was reassigned to directly support WWE's new hire, a high-ranking employee in the legal department. On February 5th, 2021, McMahon sent Miss Grant to establish a schedule for when other men, including physical therapist and Laurinaitis, could have sex with Miss Grant, which Miss Grant attempted to rebuff. The following is a direct reading from the text message between Vince McMahon and Miss Grant, allegedly, beginning with Vince McMahon's first response. Exactly, baby. He's not the only one. Blank called me this afternoon begging to eat you and F you with his nice and hard D word. Janelle, give me another week, baby, and I'll be ready. I'm feeling more like myself. It's not great, but it's getting better. Tell him soon, exclamation point, exclamation point. This is Vince. I already told him, baby. By the way, Johnny wants Tuesdays, but not this coming one, and the occasional Saturday, but maybe I can shift it to Thursday nights. Johnny would like all of the above. That's the end of the text exchange between Vince and Janelle that was entered into evidence on this complaint. Continuing with line 159. Texts like this, a shift schedule, caused Miss Grant to suffer breakdowns over how her original hope for a new life had been reduced to an objectified and dehumanized existence with no way out. On or about March 6th, 2021, a second threesome between McMahon, Laurinaitis, and Miss Grant occurred. In March of 2021, WWE had still not hired a replacement after WWE Corporate Officer number 4's termination in November of 2020. On March 9th, 2021, McMahon informed Miss Grant, still an entry-level coordinator, that top executives in the company knew about their relationship and that her presence in the legal department was effectively delaying the company's efforts to hire a new replacement for this high-ranking official, reinforcing the fact that many with within the company were well aware of the circumstances detailed herein. As a result, McMahon stated the plan was for her to change departments, and he verbally directed Miss Grant to transfer to the Talent Relations Department, reporting to Laurinaitis. On March 10th, 2021, Miss Grant sent McMahon a text message recapping their conversation and expressing shock and a range of concerns, including about Laurinaitis. Essentially, Miss Grant expressed a desire to be treated humanely and taken seriously, which she acknowledged could be an uphill battle. Unfortunately, Miss Grant's transfer to the Talent Relations Department came with the exception from both Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis that she engaged with Laurinaitis sexually, both physically and with explicit content. On March 10th, 2021, WWE Corporate Officer number 2 informed Miss Grant that day that she would officially be moved to Talent Relations and would quickly begin reporting to Laurinaitis, although details about her role, including a title and salary, were still being firmed up. In essence, Miss Grant again found herself in a completely undefined role, except for understanding that she will remain a sexual slave to be used and trafficked by McMahon within the WWE. On March 12th, 2021, McMahon reminded her of the connection between her job and her role as a sexual object by saying, "Let's work hard and play hard too." On March 16th, 2021, Miss Grant was directed to pick up a key to Laurinaitis' hotel room and serve herself to him as breakfast before the start of work. McMahon constantly reinforced the expectation that Miss Grant sexually performed for him and her new boss Laurinaitis both in and out of the office. McMahon wrote on March 22nd, 2021, "Do you promise to make me proud, baby? Will you show him what a porno star you can be? Will you show off for me like never before? ? And on the days when he's in town, I want him to F you every morning and later in the office too." McMahon also indicated on April 2nd, 2021 that Miss Grant should obey if Laurinaitis wanted to bring in yet more men. The following is a text message from Vince McMahon to Janel Grant allegedly that is included in the complaint as evidence to the above statement. Vince, maybe he wants 2 other guys to join you with him. Holy shit, you've told him you would do anything with him. So if he surprised you with 2 others, you would have no alternative than to take them on. OMG, the stories you could tell me then. It makes me want to C-word right now. By the way, I just thought of what I think is an excellent idea. Maybe you can hint that if he knows someone who can be discreet, it might be better if you and Johnny try him out first so he can get comfortable before he is introduced to me. Actually, that makes total sense, doesn't it? Continuing with line 170. In April 2021, WWE's Senior Vice President of Human Resources was fired. The same month, McMahon informed Ms. Grant that she would be given the title of Vice President Operations within the Talent Department. However, days later, McMahon backtracked and said that he would be a Director of Operations instead to avoid suspicion of a sudden promotion to Vice President. During this conversation, McMahon told Ms. Grant that he had expressed to other WWE management that he wanted her to reach the level of Vice President and spend a year or 2 in the position, as she would be able to take the experience anywhere, in quotes. Ms. Grant left this conversation with McMahon hoping that she could escape this situation with her finances and reputation intact. She just needed to survive until that point. In an April 2021 meeting, Ms. Grant and WWE Corporate Officer number 2, he acknowledged that the jump initially proposed to Vice President was too big and could put a target on Ms. Grant's back. Nevertheless, WWE Corporate Officer number 2 presented Ms. Grant with paperwork detailing a base salary increase to $200,000 as Director of Operations. As soon as Ms. Grant began working directly for Laurinaitis, forcible touching and overtly sexual behavior became a part of daily life when he was in the office. On numerous occasions, Ms. Grant was directed to visit Laurinaitis at his hotel room before work to serve herself up to him as breakfast, quote unquote. These devastating experiences made Ms. Grant feel as though she were being pimped out as an object for sexual gratifications for her new boss. Upon information and belief, corporate funds from the WWE were used to finance Laurinaitis' hotel stays when these coerced sexual encounters occurred. Per McMahon's instructions, Ms. Grant reported interactions with Laurinaitis back to McMahon, for whom the story served as a source of arousal. The arrangement with Laurinaitis left Ms. Grant miserable and enraged. However, in her years of experience with McMahon, she knew her request to stop would be ignored at best or used to destroy her career and reputation at worst. Ms. Grant was further left feeling isolated by colleagues and surveilled by the top-level employees within WWE. Professionally and personally, Ms. Grant's fate was entirely in the hands of McMahon, Laurinaitis, and other WWE executives who enabled her abuse. On May 24th, 2021, McMahon messaged Miss Grant to remind her that a mistake could destroy her career and that she should pursue verbal communication rather than written where possible. The following is a text message between Vince and Miss Grant, allegedly, beginning with the words of Vince McMahon texted to Miss Grant. Vince, those compliments will keep on coming, baby. Just wait and see. I totally understand and agree, R.E., being scared of communication and photos. Johnny gets drunk and sloppy and could easily make a mistake that could cost him his job and yours too. Verbal communication is the best way to go. That said, have you and Johnny talked about breakfast tomorrow? Janelle, we haven't discussed it at all. It's up in the air. Johnny complained about getting a new phone and it just arrived. I haven't set up a time to coordinate setting it up with IT because I need him to assure me that he's erased everything that he's ever saved. Truly, I regret that he ever got pics. It's not worth the stressing I'm feeling. I'm done with it. Line 180. Panic that someone else's mistake could cost Miss Grant her livelihood left her feeling helpless and afraid of what would happen if McMahon's moods shifted, leading her to message him expressions of loyalty, love, and submission as a coping mechanism, and with the hope that he would protect her. On June 14th, 2021, Miss Grant again told McMahon that she did not want to engage in sexual encounters with Laurinaitis, adding, I've left that hotel feeling bad about myself every time, quote unquote. McMahon responded that one-on-one encounters could cease, but that he expected threesomes with Laurinaitis to continue. McMahon and Laurinaitis confined Miss Grant in an office for an abusive sexual assault at WWE headquarters. Line 182. The following morning on June 15th, 2021 at approximately 7:51 a.m., Miss Grant messaged McMahon that due to her work on an important project, she did not want a threesome that week, as a threesome won't set me up for success. It'll knock me out, quote unquote. To avoid pushback from McMahon, Miss Grant offered the following week instead. McMahon and Laurinaitis ignored her plea and brought her into Laurinaitis' office, forcibly touching and undressing her before forcing her to engage in a threesome in a conference table. Miss Grant pleaded, no, and please stop. McMahon responded with, no means yes, quote unquote. Miss Grant again told them to stop. Instead, McMahon licked his fingers and he penetrated Miss Grant and said, take it, bitch. With each taking turns restraining her for the other, Laurinaitis then joined by forcibly shoving his tongue and then penis into Miss Grant's mouth. On June 23rd, 2021, around 11:42 a.m., McMahon directed Miss Grant in the middle of a workday to meet him at a lower floor. When Miss Grant arrived, McMahon led her inside his private locker room, locked the door, and then forced himself on her over a massage table. Later that day, $15,000 in gift cards to Bloomingdale were purchased at McMahon's direction and delivered by McMahon's personal assistant to Miss Grant in her office. On multiple other occasions while Miss Grant worked under Laurinaitis, including after McMahon's promise that one-on-one encounters would end, and even after his wife moved across the country to join Laurinaitis, he would call Miss Grant into his office, lock the door, unzip his pants, and instruct Miss Grant to perform oral sex. Through all this, Miss Grant noticed that the less she sexually engaged with Laurinaitis, the less work she had, as Laurinaitis began to belittle Miss Grant in front of colleagues. Fearing for herself and her future, Miss Grant asked Laurinaitis whether he still supported her promotion to vice president. He deflected with an answer about considering all options and changed the topic. The extreme uncertainty and fear for her future exacerbated Miss Grant's physical symptoms of illness, including gastrointestinal issues and vomiting, which continued to worsen over the remainder of her time with WWE. McMahon uses Miss Grant as a sexual pawn to entice world-famous wrestling talent and to keep WWE superstar under contract with WWE. WWE Superstar is famous worldwide as a top talent with WWE, with a large collective fan base that helps generate viewership and drives in-person attendance, all of which enrich WWE and McMahon. Upon information and belief, McMahon began to recruit WWE Superstar for a sexual encounter with Miss Grant while she was still a coordinator in the legal department. By July of 2021, McMahon informed Miss Grant that WWE Superstar would be their next, quote, playmate, unquote. As in other instances, McMahon described his fantasy of seeing Miss Grant engaged in unmerciful sex acts with WWE Superstar, during which he would, quote, rip her open, unquote. McMahon also confided to Miss Grant that he wanted to have WWE Superstar under a new contract, while the Superstar indicated an interest in a return to other professional endeavors. On or about July 12th, 2021, McMahon directed Miss Grant to create personalized sexual content for the Superstar. McMahon shared the photos with WWE Superstar and then informed Miss Grant that he, quote, likes what he sees, quote unquote. On July 21st, 2021, McMahon flew and or caused WWE superstar to fly on a jet into a local airport and travel into Connecticut across state lines, in parentheses, for what McMahon described to Miss Grant as a business dinner, as well as a sexual encounter with Miss Grant in McMahon's condo. Upon information and belief, the dinner was to discuss WWE superstar's continued involvement with WWE. Prior to the business dinner with McMahon, the superstar made a brief visit to Miss Grant's building. However, WWE superstar did not return to the building for a sexual encounter because he was too intoxicated and was taken back to the plane. Later that evening, after McMahon recounted the story about his dinner with WWE superstar to Miss Grant, he sought to salvage the night with a request that they role-play a sexual encounter in which McMahon acted as if he were WWE superstar. McMahon was so physically rough with Miss Grant during this encounter that Miss Grant begged McMahon to stop numerous times, including loud cries of, quote, help, I'm serious and I'm scared, as he, among other things, penetrated her, fisted her, pulled her hair, pinned her, shoved her, and open palm slapped her. McMahon's assault caused Miss Grant to break down weeping and curl into the fetal position with her arms pulled up to protect her face. McMahon alternated between slaps and shoves before admitting that, I'm really fucking up with you right and left tonight, huh? McMahon forbade Miss Grant from leaving his condo that night unless she could verbally assure him that there wasn't a problem and everything with them was okay. Notably, however, he made no effort to check on her well-being after she left his condo. On August 26, 2021, WWE held its second biggest annual event, SummerSlam, in Las Vegas Allegiant Stadium. Around this time, McMahon and WWE superstar privately reached an informal agreement about his return. That night, McMahon texted Miss Grant a reminder that she was an enslaved object to him. Quote, I want to drive you lower and lower, so low that you might beg me to sell you. Emphasis added. McMahon continued to advertise a sexual encounter with Miss Grant to WWE superstar during the formal negotiation of a new booking contract with the WWE. The following is the reading of a text message from Vince allegedly to Janel Grant. Here's what blank said after I told him that part of the deal was fucking you. LOL, that's your turf, in quotes. She will be ruined after me and leave your ass. Plus, after me, your tool won't fit anymore. Laughing emojis. Line 198. In December 2021, McMahon gave Miss Grant's personal cell number to a WWE superstar and promised she'll do anything requested of her. In the days that followed, WWE superstar revealed a fetish to Miss Grant and tested McMahon's promise that Miss Grant would, quote, do anything, unquote, with a request that she send a video of herself urinating. Unable to recognize herself, Miss Grant went numb and obeyed. WWE superstar informed Miss Grant that if she had not complied with his request, he would have lost any interest in her and then called her a bitch. That same month, WWE superstar expressed to Miss Grant his desire to set a play date and have a sexual encounter. However, a snowstorm changed WWE superstar's travel plans, and Miss Grant ultimately used the weather and COVID-19 as an excuse to back out. K. McMahon tells Miss Grant that his wife has learned about her and pressures Miss Grant for an NDA. Line 202. In early January 2022, McMahon abruptly distanced himself from Miss Grant, saying that he could not speak or be in the same room as her. On January 9th, 2022, McMahon agreed to speak with Miss Grant at his condo. During this meeting, McMahon told Miss Grant that his wife, Linda McMahon, had learned about his relationship with Miss Grant and that he was losing his condo and that she would divorce him. He added, too, that a public divorce would make Miss Grant a headline. Purportedly to salvage his marriage and avoid both the negative publicity and other repercussions of a divorce, McMahon wanted to ensure that Miss Grant would remain silent about his personal misconduct in order to preserve his controlling interest in WWE. McMahon told Miss Grant that if she left WWE and signed an NDA, he was confident Linda McMahon would not divorce him. He could remain in the condo, and Miss Grant would avoid reputational harm. McMahon instructed Miss Grant that she should not go back to the office and immediately lessen her involvement on open work items. Miss Grant expressed concerns about both her name being mentioned in the media and loss of control over her image, especially as McMahon had shared content of her for close to 2 years, and the ramifications for her career. McMahon suggested that he would attempt to help keep Miss Grant's reputation intact and that he or corporate officer number 1 would personally help Miss Grant to find another job. McMahon also instructed Miss Grant not to share this news with anyone and suggested she offer health-related excuses if asked about leaving WWE. Regarding the NDA, Miss Grant asked McMahon, "Is this when when Jerry sends the papers. McMahon nodded and assured Miss Grant that they would be in the driver's seat, quote unquote, to iron out the terms together, but she would need an attorney to make things official and approved of Miss Grant asking Celebrity Doctor for an attorney referral. Following this discussion, McMahon led Miss Grant to his bedroom for another sexual encounter. On January 14th, 2022, McMahon sent Miss Grant a to-do list for purposes of effectuating the NDA, such as retaining counsel, and also included an offer for one-on-one career coaching. McMahon suggested the list had been drafted by corporate officer number 2 from the WWE. Before Miss Grant retained counsel, McMahon discussed the amount of money that would be exchanged for the NDA and settled on a lump sum of $3 million. After Miss Grant told McMahon his initial offer of $1 million was not enough to compensate for the lost earning potential and the fact that she would be unable to continue the promised career trajectory of vice president, as well as failing to last as a director for a full year. Before Miss Grant retained counsel, McMahon called Miss Grant with an update and informed her that McMahon's attorney and counsel for WWE insisted on installment payments due to, quote, cash flow purposes, unquote. When Miss Grant responded that this reasoning did not make sense for a billionaire, McMahon insisted that it was not his idea. On or about January 19th, 2022, Miss Grant advised McMahon that she had contacted Celebrity Doctor about an attorney referral, and on that physician's recommendation and upon McMahon's approval, she signed a retainer agreement with a lawyer later that day. On January 24th, 2022, McMahon continued to engage in sexual text message exchanges with Miss Grant, including encouraging her to send an explicit photo to the WWE superstar. McMahon also requested that Miss Grant send him content that she had sent to said superstar. The negotiations of the NDA were brief, lasting only 8 days. Miss Grant reminded McMahon that the NDA ought to address people who knew about their relationship, including but not limited to corporate officer number 1, number 2, John Laurinaitis, and McMahon's personal assistants. Miss Grant and her attorney sought to incorporate the list of individuals who had knowledge of the relationship into a Schedule A in the NDA. Miss Grant's requested revisions were flatly rejected by McMahon and WWE, who reverted to their original draft rather than incorporate any of her proposed changes, with the exception that, as of the date of execution, Miss Grant would not speak of the relationship. On or around January 26, 2022, McMahon articulated an even more pressing need to get the NDA signed immediately, informing Miss Grant that he was under a tight deadline to report pending or threatened legal action to the WWE Board of Directors, specifically the Audit Committee, and that McMahon and his attorney could not do so unless Miss Grant signed the NDA. He informed Miss Grant that the board members were concerned about the delay. Furthermore, McMahon repeatedly pressed Miss Grant to stop her attorney from any further wordsmithing, quote unquote, and blamed Miss Grant's attorney for not understanding the urgency of the situation. Also, despite any previous approval, McMahon now expressed that both he and his attorney had concerns about Miss Grant's attorney and warned her that her counsel could not be trusted, which in turn caused Miss Grant to question her trust in her personal attorney. On or around January 26th, 2022, Miss Grant became so overwhelmed that she asked to simply give notice without the need for a payment, even offering to sign a napkin or post it as a sign of goodwill. McMahon flatly rejected her desire to back out. On January 27th, 2022, just 8 days after Miss Grant had hired an attorney, McMahon left Miss Grant a lengthy audio message explaining why they needed to go through with the NDA, pushing her to hurry up and sign the NDA, and advising that he would be, quote, double fucked, unquote, if she did not, presumably referring to both his divorce and report to the board of directors. Between January 27th, 2022 and January 28th, 2022, there were unresolved edits that led to panicked phone calls, including an attorney confidentiality clause and signatory line that Miss Grant's counsel said he would never sign. Also, the deadline to sign the NDA was pushed up from January 31st to January 28th of 2022. McMahon continued pressuring Miss Grant with calls, during which he pleaded demand, threatened, and begged her to sign the NDA, and reminded her that by not signing, she would jeopardize him, the company, and his family, and that she would surely become the subject of national headlines and ruin her reputation if she did not sign the NDA by the start of WWE's live programming schedule on January 28th. He reassured her that nothing would change between them, and she would emerge with her reputation intact if she would simply sign the NDA. In a state of mental defeat and fear from McMahon's threats, Miss Grant succumbed to his unrelenting pressure and signed the NDA NDA just before the deadline on January 28, 2022. On February 4th, 2022, Ms. Grant was wired $1 million as the first installment of the NDA. On February 28, 2022, Ms. Grant was wired $10,000 to cover her attorney's fees incurred in connection with the NDA. Both wires were sent with originator described as Vincent K. McMahon, care of WWF, and originator address as 1241 East Main Street, Stamford, Connecticut, 06902, United States. On February 9th and 10th, 2022, Ms. Grant gave notice to John Laurinaitis and put Human Resources at WWE on official notice that she was leaving WWE. After signing the NDA, Ms. Grant continued to ask about who had told Linda McMahon, as she was concerned about her ability to obtain employment in the future. McMahon responded that it did not matter and that he was tired of her questions. After the NDA was signed, McMahon, wearing only a white robe, met Ms. Grant in his condo to review outstanding business items. As Ms. Grant was proceeding to the door to leave, McMahon grabbed her arm before she exited and commanded her to do, quote, one last thing, quote, and, quote, get on your knees, quote. As Ms. Grant knelt on the hard floor barely a few feet away from the front door, McMahon opened his robe and ordered her to, quote, eat him, unquote. McMahon grabbed the back of Ms. Grant's head and slammed her face into his crotch a couple of times until she gagged and pushed him away, telling him to stop and that she couldn't breathe. McMahon responded that she wouldn't get away that easily and held her head as he forced himself back into her mouth until she had no air. Ms. Grant tried to push him away, but he held her head firmly in place and loudly commanded her to, quote, look up, followed by, quote, take it, bitch. They momentarily made eye contact before McMahon's force caused Ms. Grant's body to convulse and retch with tears streaming down her face. McMahon then released his hold and closed his robe as she stood up. After leaving, Ms. Grant never saw McMahon again. On March 2nd, 2022, while Ms. Grant was away on a trip to Florida, McMahon called Ms. Grant to advise that it would probably be the last time she would hear from him, and if she needed anything, to contact WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 or Corporate Officer Number 2 over the course of an approximately half-hour call in which McMahon lamented both his inability to focus on the upcoming WrestleMania and how his personal life had blown up over the past few weeks. Toward the end of their conversation, McMahon and Ms. Grant agreed to resume contact after WrestleMania. He also instructed Ms. Grant to continue having sexual relations with other men, including WWE Superstar, in the meantime. On or around March 4th, 2022, WWE Superstar messaged Ms. Grant that he was in New York. In line with McMahon's orders, Ms. Grant texted WWE Superstar explicit pictures. On March 27th, 2022, WWE Superstar reached out to Ms. Grant again. Ms. Grant interpreted these back-to-back advances as an indication of McMahon's continued control. On March 30th, 2022, Ms. Grant's counsel received a call from McMahon's attorney advising that there had been an anonymous email about the relationship between Ms. Grant and McMahon and Laurinaitis. Later, in June and July 2022, stories were published regarding the matter of McMahon's multiple NDAs with various women associated with WWE and others. Ms. Grant did not receive another payment under her NDA in February of 2023. Further, despite assurances from McMahon that he would cover her medical care and the costs associated with her tax liability for the $1 million payment, McMahon has refused to cover those costs. McMahon continued to pay for Ms. Grant's medical care until April 15th of 2022, when it abruptly ceased. Part 2. Gifts given to plaintiff during time with WWE and association with McMahon. Line 232. From 2019 until 2022, McMahon provided Ms. Grant with gifts to keep her under McMahon's control. Upon information and belief, the gifts provided to Ms. Grant included ones purchased by McMahon and expensed them to WWE. Examples of these items received by Ms. Grant from McMahon in 2019 include the following: Alternative Clinic medical care, medical and cosmetic services and products, clubhouse access to the Belmont Stakes, WrestleMania private full-day transportation and premium tickets, a $2,000 Nordstrom gift card, and a massive box of Godiva chocolates. Examples for the items received by Ms. Grant from McMahon in 2020 include the following: $20,000 towards surgery paid directly to a surgeon's office, pearl diamond pave lariat necklace from Bottridge in Greenwich, Connecticut, blue cashmere knee-length cardigan from Nordstrom, a blue Burberry check cashmere scarf, also also from Nordstrom, a blue cashmere and fur hat, Nordstrom, gray cashmere shawl, Nordstrom, Celine sunglasses, Nordstrom, cable knit throw blanket, and a large bouquet of flowers delivered approximately every other week. Examples of items received by Miss Grant from McMahon in 2021 include the following: a 2022 BMW 430xi, $5,000 gift card at Lanphier Spa, 2 private chef-catered dinners in McMahon's condo, gold and diamond pave paperclip necklace from Battridge in Greenwich, Connecticut, $15,000 in Bloomingdale's gift cards, food assortment display and antique tea ceremony set from Saudi Arabia, and a large bouquet of flowers delivered approximately every other week. Part 3. Miss Grant was a subordinate and vulnerable victim to predators, not a consenting and willing participant. Miss Grant was groomed and coerced by McMahon and Laurinaitis, and the WWE stood by and facilitated efforts to keep Miss Grant employed by WWE to ensure McMahon's continued sexual exploitation. In addition to what Miss Grant and her medical providers who examined her following the abuse will testify to, there is ample other evidence of Miss Grant's mental state and her attempts to avoid the unfortunate circumstances she found herself in. In January of 2021, Miss Grant sent a message to resident manager stating that she was miserable at WWE. I don't say it to Vince, but as grateful as I am for my job and my salary, I actually am miserable. Mismanaged all the time. They admit they don't know what to do with me. Nobody gave a fuck when I was harassed and retaliated against to the point my reputation was questioned and my work was taken away. As further alleged through the complaint, Miss Grant was frequently referred to as McMahon's, quote, bitch, unquote. On multiple occasions, Miss Grant objected to this treatment. As alleged herein, before Miss Grant was being routinely directed by McMahon to engage in sexual contact with other men, Miss Grant expressed her apprehension about McMahon's fantasy texts manifesting and graduating into reality. Further, at nearly all relevant times, Miss Grant was an employee of the WWE and could reasonably expect, at a minimum, to lose her position if she did not comply with the wishes of McMahon. McMahon controlled WWE during Miss Grant's employment, and the company knew, but did nothing about McMahon's exploitation of Miss Grant. As detailed herein, WWE knew of McMahon's illegal conduct and did nothing to stop it. This is self-evident from the numerous executive level and board members who were privy to McMahon's involvement with Miss Grant, as well as his prior incidents involving sexual misconduct. For instance, in or around March 21st, 2021, Miss Grant introduced herself to Corporate Officer Number 1 when they passed one another in the hallway. Corporate Officer Number 1 responded by telling Miss Grant that Corporate Officer Number 1 knew exactly who she was. Corporate Officer Number 1 maintained an office suite on the 4th floor of WWE's company headquarters at 1241 East Main Street. Meanwhile, Miss Grant's cubicle in the company's legal department was in a different building at 1266 East Main and across the street from Corporate Officer Number 1's office. Miss Grant had no physical presence at 1241 East Main Street until the beginning of February 2021, when she began to report to an attorney who kept an office with both buildings. Given that WWE Corporate Officer Number 1, a very high-ranking WWE officer, and Miss Grant was an entry-level coordinator in the legal department, it is unusual that Corporate Officer Number 1 would know who Miss Grant was at all at that point, except that Corporate Officer Number 1 knew of Miss Grant, at least in part by hearing about the ongoing exploitation of Miss Grant by McMahon. Following Miss Grant's messages to McMahon on March 9th, 2021, McMahon summoned Miss Grant to his condo that evening for a conversation during which McMahon confirmed that Corporate Officer Number 1 indeed did know exactly who she was, as McMahon had privately met with Corporate Officer Number 1 and WWE's Corporate Officer Number 2 and advised these individuals of McMahon's connection to Miss Grant. McMahon continued this conversation by detailing to Miss Grant that they had expressed concern but were ultimately supportive. McMahon also advised Miss Grant that one or both of Corporate Officer Number 1 and or 2 inquired whether Miss Grant could be trusted, and that McMahon offered assurances that Miss Grant would not do something to hurt the WWE. Knowledge on the part of WWE is further illustrated by the multiple meetings Miss Grant had about initial hiring and subsequent position changes, including a number of such meetings with WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 and a voice memo McMahon sent Miss Grant on the following morning, on March 10th, mentioning mentioning the names of both corporate officer number 1 and 2 in connection with the new role. It's unusual for the executive chairman and CEO to name drop 2 of the company's highest ranking officers in connection with the coordinator's first job promotion, especially as there are human resources partners assigned to each department. WWE corporate officer number 4 was a high-ranking legal department employee at WWE until around November 2020. Upon information and belief that corporate officer number 4 was terminated or asked to resign from officer number 4's post at WWE, McMahon expressed to Ms. Grant that WWE corporate officer number 4, while still employed at WWE, knew or highly suspected that a sexual relationship existed between McMahon and Ms. Grant. Upon information and belief, corporate officer number 4 articulated to corporate officer number 4's knowledge or suspicion to at least one or another executive. Knowledge on the part of WWE is further illustrated by the fact that Ms. Grant's presence became more visible over time, including during executive committee meetings, which were attended by individuals who either had direct knowledge of McMahon's sexual exploitation of Ms. Grant or were otherwise suspicious. Given Ms. Grant's length of employment and job title, it was an abnormal sign of different and special treatment for her to attend such meetings, especially when the executive head of the department, John Laurinaitis, was in attendance as well. Notably, Ms. Grant inquired with both WWE corporate officer number 1 and number 2 about whether it was appropriate for her to attend these meetings. Additionally, WWE corporate officer number 3, another high-ranking WWE official and member of the WWE board of directors at the time of Ms. Grant's employment with WWE, motioned for Ms. Grant to sit in a chair near corporate officer number 3 at the boardroom table during one of the meetings. Upon information and belief that corporate officer number 3 knew of other instances of McMahon engaging in appropriate sexual conduct. Upon information and belief, numerous other independent contractors, employees, as well as executives and or board members within WWE knew of or suspected McMahon's misconduct involving Ms. Grant, including by being shown explicit photos of Ms. Grant by McMahon. McMahon directed a single attorney to negotiate the NDA on behalf of WWE and McMahon, both parties to the agreement. McMahon's abuse of Ms. Grant did not come as a surprise to anyone at WWE because he himself faced numerous prior accusations of sexual misconduct, including in 1994, WWE referee Rita Chatterton alleged that McMahon had raped her upon luring her into a limousine to discuss her career. She recounted it for New York Magazine. "I was forced into oral sex with Vince McMahon. When I couldn't complete his desires, he got really angry, started ripping off my jeans, pulled me on top of him, and told me again that if I wanted a $500,000 a year contract, I had to satisfy him. He could make me or break me, and if I didn't satisfy him, I was blackballed. That was it. I was done." In February 2006, the Palm Beach Post reported that McMahon had showed nude pictures of himself to a tanning booth attendant at Tanza Bar in Boca Raton, Florida, and subsequently made unwelcome advances and finally cornered her in a tanning booth and groped her. A former spa manager at a California resort accused McMahon of assaulting her at the resort in 2011. To further illustrate knowledge of the culture of sexual misconduct at WWE, top-level executives not only failed to properly investigate the abuse, but also compounded Ms. Grant's suffering by making public statements that trivialized the harm perpetrated upon her. These are just a few examples as to how the WWE and its most senior officials knew about and fostered a culture where the venture of harassment and sexual exploitation of women was tolerated to further the business and financial interests of WWE. Given, among other things, the history of misconduct involving other women, the notice provided by McMahon to senior leadership at WWE, rumors about the relationship within the WWE headquarters, the widespread sharing of Ms. Grant's pictures, including her face, to those inside the company by McMahon, the atypical hiring of Ms. Grant, and the atypical advancement of Ms. Grant within WWE, they clearly knew of McMahon's misconduct involving Ms. Grant and or recklessly disregarded the facts available to them. Circumstances surrounding the NDA, its invalidity, and the McMahon and WWE's disregard for the NDA. As detailed herein, the NDA signed by Ms. Grant, McMahon, and WWE was entered into through coercive tactics, and it is legally unenforceable pursuant to federal statute and common law. Exhibit A, attached here too, is a true and accurate copy of the NDA. The NDA violates the Speaks Out Act and is thus unenforceable. The NDA is also void and unenforceable because the confidentiality term, a core term, is overly broad in its face. As written, it would prevent Ms. Grant from saying anything to anyone about WWE or her employment there, which of course she would need to apply for a job, for example, let alone exposing McMahon and other sexual assaults and abuse of Miss Grant. The NDAs that McMahon has used to silence other women may be equally unenforceable if the same language was used. Miss Grant was moreover coerced into signing the NDA merely 8 days after she first spoke to an attorney whom McMahon initially approved of and then cautioned Miss Grant against trusting before she was railroaded into rejecting all of her own attorney's comments. This occurred because of relentless pressure, including implicit and explicit threats by McMahon. The NDA did not include basic terms she was promised by McMahon, including that he would pay for her lawyers, medical care, and taxes. Regardless, even if it were enforceable, McMahon has breached a core term of the NDA. He paid $1 million but failed to make any further payments, including the installment of $500,000 that was to be paid within 10 days of February 1st, 2023, under Section VB of the agreement. Furthermore, circumstances have changed in that Miss Grant's name has now been publicly released through no fault of her own, which impacts employment prospects and has led to further trauma and humiliation. Miss Grant's life after this abuse and resulting damages. Line 265. As detailed herein, Miss Grant was exploited during her time of employment with WWE and was subjected to countless depraved and humiliating acts, which has led to severe and permanent trauma. She has been further traumatized by having to relive those experiences when giving evidence to the government in connection with their investigations of WWE. Indeed, Miss Grant's trauma and ongoing fears of additional retaliation was so severe that she required extended inpatient treatment. Today, she lives with so much anxiety and depression that she is unable to leave her residence for weeks at a time out of fear and PTSD. Due to this trauma and inability to leave her home, Miss Grant was terminated from employment on January 27th, 2023, when she lost not only her dream job of managing her building, but the only job she could procure without the need for any references. Miss Grant's lost income is $80,000 per year. The severe restrictions of the NDA have created a wedge in all of Miss Grant's relationships and left her in a perpetual state of isolation, as her family has passed away and she cannot and does not lean on the support of the community due to the NDA's restrictions. Further, Miss Grant has experienced weight loss, insomnia, rashes, flashback to her exploitation, nightmares, panic attacks, and depression. Miss Grant will go days without brushing her teeth, taking a shower, or washing her clothes. On many days, she doesn't leave her bed. Miss Grant will prove at trial that she will need lifelong treatment because of the pain and suffering inflicted upon her by defendants. Causes of action, count 1, declaratory relief. NDA voided under the Speak Out Act, 42 U.S. Code 19401, against McMahon and the WWE. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 270 as if fully stated herein. The NDA attached as Exhibit A was entered into on January 28, 2022. The Speak Out Act, 42 U.S. Code 19401, was enacted on December 7, 2022, and applies with respect to a claim that is filed under federal, state, or tribal law on or after December 7, 2022. The Speak Out Act defines a sexual assault dispute as a dispute involving a non-consensual sexual act or sexual contact, as such terms are defined in Section 2246 of Title 18 or similar applicable tribal or state law, including when the victim lacks capacity to consent, and a sexual harassment dispute as a dispute relating to conduct that is alleged to constitute sexual harassment under applicable federal, tribal, or state law, 42 U.S. Code 19402. The Speak Out Act provides that, with respect to a sexual assault dispute or sexual harassment dispute, no non-disclosure clause or non-disparagement clause agreed to before the dispute arises shall be judicially unenforceable in instances in which conduct is alleged to have violated federal, tribal, or state law, 42 U.S. Code 19403. The allegations herein include sexual harassment and assault disputes as defined by the Speak Out Act, and the NDA seeks to bar the claims brought herein. Because the claims themselves constitute the dispute as of the date of this complaint filing, then, pursuant to the Speak Out Act, the core term of the NDA, and thus the NDA itself, is judicially unenforceable, and plaintiff is entitled to declaratory judgment. Count 2, declaratory relief, NDA voided under common law against McMahon and WWE. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 277 as if fully stated herein. The NDA appearing at Exhibit A is void and unenforceable pursuant to the Connecticut common law for at least 5 reasons. First, the scope of the NDA, including the confidentiality provision, is impermissibly broad. It provides Ms. Grant will not disclose, discuss, or reveal any claims against or information about McMahon, her relationship with McMahon, WWE, or any employees or independent contractors of WWE to third parties on social media, in any public forum, or to any member of the media. Emphasis added. Read literally, this would prevent her from disclosing the mere fact that she worked for WWE in an interview or on her resume. Furthermore, confidential information, quote-unquote, was not defined, and thus is overbroad, particularly in light of information that has since become public knowledge. There cannot have been a meeting of the minds on the overly broad confidentiality provision. Second, the NDA is invalid in that Ms. Grant entered into the contract under duress and undue influence as detailed herein. There were drastic power differences and economic disparity. Ms. Grant, who had never held a paying office job in her life due to caretaking for her parents, was up against McMahon and WWE, titans of the wrestling and entertainment worlds. The emotional and mental abuse and trauma endured by Mrs. Grant further compounded this disparity, such that Ms. Grant felt like she did not have a real say or choice in the matter. McMahon also exerted relentless pressure on Ms. Grant. As but one example, McMahon left her an extensive voice memo shortly before the NDA was signed, wherein he emphasized the public nature of the WWE and the consequences that could result if the NDA was not signed before an audit committee convened. Third, the NDA is a contract of adhesion. There was no meaningful choice for Ms. Grant. Proposed revisions by Ms. Grant's attorney were consistently and ultimately rejected by McMahon's attorney, and during that time, McMahon was pressuring Ms. Grant to sign the agreement. Fourth, the NDA is substantially unconscionable in that it is clearly one-sided. For example, the non-disparagement provision only applies to Ms. Grant and not McMahon or the WWE. Further, although she was slated to receive $1 million and $2 million in installments of $500,000 over the years, Ms. Grant also gave up her job at WWE as a result of this agreement. Plaintiff's compensation is also out of line with what similarly situated individuals have received. The agreement is even more one-sided with respect to the WWE because only McMahon is responsible for payments. The WWE's only obligations are to not sue Ms. Grant and to write a favorable letter of recommendation to a future employer upon request. Notably, however, per the terms of the NDA, that letter would come from now fired/disgraced former employee defendant Laurinaitis, who raped and sexually assaulted Ms. Grant. Fifth, the NDA is void as against public policy. The NDA purports to silence a victim of unlawful sexual abuse and prevent her from taking steps to protect other women at WWE. The policies at issue include those that were the impetus for the Speaks Out Act. Under Connecticut law, courts will not blue pencil contracts where the unreasonable provision forms the heart of an agreement, such as here where the non-disclosure provision forms the heart of the contract. Thus, the entirety of the NDA must be deemed void and unenforceable, even if the confidentiality terms were the only invalid term. It is not. Even if the confidentiality term were the only invalid term. It is not. The NDA has, in any event, been breached by McMahon and the WWE in that Ms. Grant did not receive a second payment of $500,000 within 10 days of February 1st, 2023. Count 3. Violations of TVPA 18 U.S. Code 1591, 1595 against McMahon and Laurinaitis. Line 287. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 286 as if fully stated herein. 288. At all times relevant, McMahon was engaged in travel throughout the United States for purposes of conducting business in his position at the WWE. McMahon communicated with the plaintiff while traveling across the country and internationally to recruit, entice, obtain, provide, maintain, and or solicit plaintiff for the purposes of engaging in sexual acts. He also flew others and or caused others to travel to Connecticut, including Laurinaitis and WWE superstar, from out of state for the purpose of sexually exploiting Ms. Grant. At all times relevant, McMahon and Laurinaitis recruited, enticed, obtained, provided, maintained, supervised, or otherwise solicited Ms. Grant to engage in sexual conduct with the assurance that plaintiff would be given a position at WWE, job security within the WWE, and advancement within the WWE. At all times relevant, McMahon and Laurinaitis knew that they would use fraud or coercion, as they had done to other women in the past, on plaintiff for sexual encounters. McMahon and Laurinaitis offered job placement and security as well as numerous gifts and special treatment and assurances promises of personal protections, i.e. McMahon's financial protection, reputational protection, and medical care, and promised these would continue if plaintiff remained loyal and obedient by engaging in the sex acts described herein. McMahon and Laurinaitis were well aware that a job at WWE and advancement and protections outlined above were of significant value to plaintiff and used that against her. As a result, McMahon and Laurinaitis were able to force, defraud, or coerce Miss Grant into continued sexual activity because of promises of job placement, job security, and advancement with the WWE and personal protections outlined above. McMahon knew that plaintiff's position would be ultimately temporary, as numerous other women had been employed by WWE only to be dismissed with NDAs and releases. At all times relevant, plaintiff was subjected to coercion in that a scheme, plan, or pattern was in place that was designed to cause plaintiff to believe that failure to perform sexual acts as alleged herein would result in serious harm, including but not limited to financial harm, reputational harm, invasion of privacy, loss of control over her image, losing her job with WWE, termination from subsequent employment, and or loss of career trajectory. At all times relevant, McMahon sought to exploit plaintiff's vulnerabilities in that he knew that she had been through past trauma, grief, and had been unable to find employment prior to joining the WWE. At all times relevant, McMahon and Laurinaitis held positions of power over Miss Grant, controlled her continued employment with WWE, and pressured her to engage in sex acts. Count 4. Participating in venture in violation of TVPA 18 U.S. Code 1591 and 1595 against WWE. Line 297. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 296 as if fully stated herein. WWE knowingly participated in the trafficking described above in violation with 18 U.S. Code 1595 by benefiting from and knowingly facilitating the venture in which McMahon traveled for WWE affairs across the United States and recruited or enticed females such as plaintiff into coerced sexual encounters on the promise of employment with WWE, job security, and advancement. WWE knew or recklessly disregarded that it was the practice of McMahon to entice, recruit, force, and/or coerce women into sexual acts based on the promise of a new life, a job, an income, job security, and advancement within the WWE, including with respect to the plaintiff. Alternatively, WWE reasonably should have known these facts under the circumstances and is subject to liability pursuant to the civil remedy provision of the TVPA 18 U.S.C. 1595A. As detailed herein, WWE employees, executives, and board members were well aware of McMahon's exploits involving plaintiff. Some were told, some were shown exploitative pictures, some witnessed unusual and or overtly sexual behaviors by McMahon and or Laurinaitis, and others could not help but hear what was going on through the walls at WWE headquarters. As detailed herein, WWE had been privy to multiple allegations against McMahon involving those similar in nature and alleged herein prior to plaintiff's employment with WWE. Despite this knowledge, WWE continued to facilitate and or supervise McMahon's wishes of hiring and or advancing plaintiff within the company. As detailed herein, McMahon showed numerous WWE employees sexually explicit photographs and or video of Miss Grant, which demonstrates the knowledge of those specific employees and constructive evidence that other employees would have learned this. Upon information and belief, other WWE employees benefited financially in helping to assist, support, and facilitate the commercial sex acts of McMahon in the WWE's culture revolved around trust relationships, increased status with McMahon, and prioritizing the protection of the company. For instance, both WWE corporate officer number 1 and number 2 continued to assist in maintaining a position at WWE, as well as advancement opportunities for Miss Grant after being told of McMahon's relations with her. Upon further information and belief, other employees were forced to resign or were let go if they knew of McMahon's exploits and failed to assist, support, and or facilitate them, such as former WWE employee WWE corporate officer number 4. WWE benefited financially from the commercial sex act venture orchestrated by McMahon, including by having wrestling talent such as WWE superstar sign new contracts with WWE after McMahon presented plaintiff as a sexual commodity for their use. Count 5. Negligence against WWE. Plaintiff incorporates paragraph 1 through 305 as if fully stated herein. WWE has a responsibility and a duty as an employer to ensure the safety, protection, and well-being of its employees. Notwithstanding its responsibility and duties, WWE knew or recklessly disregarded that it was a practice of McMahon and Laurinaitis to entice, recruit, force, and or coerce women into sexual activities based on the promise of higher job security and advancement within the WWE, including with respect to Plaintiff. Alternatively, WWE reasonably should have known these facts under the circumstances. WWE did nothing to prevent McMahon's and Laurinaitis' conduct or protect employees like Ms. Grant from it, and took no appropriate action against the risk of harm. As a result of WWE's negligence, Ms. Grant has suffered damages in the form of the harmful or offensive contact herein described, and the same caused pain and injury to Plaintiff, as well as mental and emotional trauma that is permanent in nature as described herein. Ms. Grant's injuries and damages were caused by the negligence of WWE, its employees and agents, for whose negligence WWE is liable in the following ways. A. WWE, by commission and omission, allowed and tolerated sexual assault and humiliation and fostered a culture in which such acts would be tolerated. B. WWE, by commission and omission, retained McMahon and Laurinaitis despite actual and or constructive knowledge of their propensity to entice, recruit, force, and or coerce women into sexual acts based on the promise of higher job security and advancement within the WWE. And C. WWE failed to warn Ms. Grant of the risk of harm to which she was subjected while employed by WWE. WWE owed Ms. Grant a duty of care. It breached that duty, and its breach caused Ms. Grant to suffer the acts, injuries, and damages described in this complaint. Count 6. Civil battery against Vince McMahon and WWE. Plaintiff incorporates paragraph 1 through 312 as if fully stated herein. As alleged herein, Plaintiff was subjected to numerous instances of civil battery after meeting McMahon and even after the NDA was signed, including by way of the following examples. A. On July 21st, 2021, McMahon demanded that the plaintiff eat him and perform oral sex. Ms. Grant pleaded that she couldn't breathe and needed air and asked that the encounter stop. However, McMahon persisted and verbalized his role-play fantasy while pretending to be a WWE superstar. As Ms. Grant begged for the encounter to stop multiple times, including "help, I'm serious and I'm scared," as McMahon, among other things, penetrated her fist, pulled her hair, pinned her, shoved her, and open palm slapped her. McMahon's assault caused Ms. Grant to break down into visible weeping and curl up into the fetal position with her arms pulled up to protect her face. McMahon alternated between slaps and shoves while Ms. Grant remained motionless in the fetal position and wept, "Vince, I don't recognize you," 2 times. Quote, only at that point, McMahon stopped. B. After the NDA was executed, McMahon grabbed Plaintiff's arm to turn her around when she was leaving, forced her to kneel, grabbed her head, and slammed it into his groin while saying, "Take it, quote, bitch." In all such instances, McMahon intended to engage in the harmful and offensive contact herein described and complained of. As a direct and proximate result, Ms. Grant experienced damages in the form of harmful or offensive contact herein described, and the same caused pain and injury to the plaintiff, as well as mental and emotional trauma that is permanent in nature as described herein. In all such instances, McMahon's conduct was malicious in nature in that he sought to degrade, humiliate, and objectify plaintiff for his own gratification. WWE is vicariously liable for the conduct of McMahon described above. Count 7. Civil battery against Laurinaitis and WWE. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 318 as if fully stated herein. As alleged herein, plaintiff was subjected to numerous instances of civil battery after meeting Laurinaitis. On numerous occasions, he pressed her to perform oral sex for him on demand, including in his office within company headquarters and even in the middle of a workday while colleagues were busy at their desks. During a June 15th, 2021 encounter with McMahon and Laurinaitis in the latter's office, Laurinaitis shoved his tongue in Miss Grant's mouth after she had pleaded to stop the whole encounter, then unzipped his pants and shoved his penis into plaintiff's mouth. In all such instances of battery perpetrated by Laurinaitis, he intended to engage in the harmful and offensive contact herein described and complained of by plaintiff. As a direct and proximate result of the foregoing, Miss Grant experienced damages in the form of the harmful or offensive contact herein described, and the same caused pain and injury to the plaintiff as well as permanent psychological and emotional trauma. In all such instances, Laurinaitis' conduct was malicious in that he sought to degrade, humiliate, and objectify plaintiff for his own gratification. WWE WWE is vicariously liable for the acts of Laurinaitis described above. Count 8. Intentional or negligent infliction of emotional distress against McMahon in WWE. Plaintiff incorporates paragraph 1 through 325 as if fully stated herein. As detailed herein, McMahon intended to inflict emotional distress or knew or should have known that emotional distress was the likely result of his conduct. McMahon's conduct was extreme and outrageous. Examples include McMahon sexually assaulted Miss Grant on numerous occasions. He was aggressive during sexual encounters with Miss Grant to the point of causing her pain, including during encounters she tried to stop. McMahon objectified and trafficked Miss Grant. He demanded that Miss Grant engage in threesomes with other men, that she send explicit photographs for him to share with other men, despite Miss Grant on multiple occasions explaining that she was hesitant to obeying, and all while McMahon controlled Miss Grant's job security. McMahon regularly humiliated and degraded Mrs. Grant. As one example, McMahon defecated on Mrs. Grant and directed her to continue sexually performing while covered in his fecal matter. McMahon created an environment of fear and secrecy by warning Miss Grant of the grave consequences of not being discreet about their sexual encounters, while at the same time sharing explicit photographs of her with others inside and outside of the company, and directing her to sexually service other WWE-affiliated individuals. McMahon sent perverted messages to Miss Grant that involved the latter being subjected to sexual scenarios involving extreme pain and humiliation, including during instances when Miss Grant clearly attempted to avoid a text message exchange that was sexually charged. McMahon would push back, question the plaintiff, and or become cold and distant if Miss Grant pushed back or ignored his sexually charged messages. McMahon promised other men that the plaintiff would, quote, do anything, unquote, they desired, and provided the plaintiff's personal cell number without her permission for the purpose of her performing and or providing humiliating sexual acts, such as exploitative pictures and videos, including of her urinating. McMahon ordered Miss Grant to report all such exchanges to him. As described herein, McMahon's conduct caused plaintiff's emotional distress, including that her distress would result from manipulative and coercive controlling conduct engaged in by McMahon. Further, plaintiff's resulting emotional distress includes flashbacks and bouts of PTSD brought on by conduct engaged in by McMahon. As described herein, plaintiff's emotional distress is severe, long-lasting, and permanent in that, for example, she has needed inpatient and outpatient care following her separation from WWE, and she continues to be impacted with distress and resulting adverse consequences and diminished quality of life in her day-to-day life. McMahon's conduct was malicious in nature in that he sought to degrade, humiliate, and objectify plaintiff for his own gratification throughout her employment with WWE. WWE is vicariously liable for the conduct of McMahon described above. Count 9. Intentional or negligent infliction of emotional distress against Laurinaitis and WWE. Plaintiff incorporates paragraphs 1 through 332 as if fully stated herein. As detailed herein, Laurinaitis intended to inflict emotional distress or knew or should have known that emotional distress was likely the result of his conduct. Laurinaitis' conduct was extreme and outrageous, and examples of this include the following. A. Treated Miss Grant as a sexual object over which he had been given complete control by McMahon and forced Miss Grant to sexually service him on demand, including in his office at WWE headquarters. B. Forced Miss Grant to walk to his hotel on certain mornings to serve herself to him as quote-unquote breakfast, a euphemism for sexual service. C. Engaged in aggressive sexual encounters with Miss Grant and McMahon, including a sexual assault in a WWE conference room where he inserted his penis into Miss Grant's mouth despite her protest. And D. Despite being plaintiff's direct supervisor at WWE, Laurinaitis would almost always conduct himself in a way that was overtly sexual and objectified plaintiff, including by asking for explicit photographs and sexual encounters at WWE headquarters. As described herein, Laurinaitis' conduct was the cause of plaintiff's emotional distress, including in that her distress would result from unwanted conduct engaged in by Laurinaitis, who was also her boss. Further, plaintiff's resulting emotional distress includes flashbacks and bouts of PTSD brought on by the conduct engaged in by Laurinaitis. As described herein, plaintiff's emotional distress is severe, long-lasting, and permanent in that, for example, she has needed inpatient and outpatient care following her separation from WWE, and that she continues to be impacted with the distress and resulting adverse consequences and diminished quality of life in her day-to-day life. 337. WWE is vicariously liable for the acts of Laurinaitis described above, wherefore plaintiff respectfully requests A. Declaratory judgment that the NDA is void and unenforceable and does not bar any of plaintiff's claims against defendants McMahon and WWE. B. B, judgment for compensatory damages, reasonable attorney fees and costs, and punitive damages against defendants pursuant to 18 U.S. Code 1595 and other applicable laws, and C, such other and further relief as the court deems just and proper. Respectfully submitted this 25th day of January 2024. This has been the full reading of the complaint of Plaintiff Janel Grant against the WWE, John Laurinaitis, and Vincent Kennedy McMahon. All 67 pages.